Hello, everyone. It's Shane Kanto, your Wasteland reviewer, and welcome to the Development Hell podcast. And it is the reconvening of the monthly movie club here. We're light in our members this month, but we do have an interesting documentary to talk about. But Joe, Jim, and I are here to discuss Jonathan Demme's documentary, Cousin Bobby. Surprise, surprise. This film is about Jonathan Demme's cousin named Bobby, and he is Episcopalian minister in Harlem. So this 70-minute documentary film is available on YouTube, which is where we watched it. I'm just going to go out on a limb here and say that none of us had seen this before.
Correct.
Yup.
So this is the first documentary we're covering on the movie club, and probably the most obscure film we have covered on the movie club. But this is indeed about Episcopalian minister Bobby Demme from Harlem. But let's go around the horn like we usually do and give our general thoughts on the film. So, Joe, let's get us started.
Yeah, like I said, this is my first time watching it. Kind of surprised we haven't watched documentaries on the movie club. I find them to be a very fascinating format, especially when you play with the documentary format, so it isn't just like watching Planet Earth. Um, I feel like with this one, I don't I feel bad that I don't watch a lot of Jonathan Demme's work. And he is a very prolific filmmaker who has inspired a lot of filmmakers. And, his most notable work was this little indie film you may have heard of called Silence of the Lambs. Um, I haven't seen Philadelphia. I heard it's a fantastic movie, fantastic performance. And something about this film and the context of how it was, I mean, the experiences and what his cousin did, it's pretty fascinating. And the film being shot on VHS gives it this very unique 90s feel aesthetic that reminded me of another film that I haven't watched in its entirety. I think called 1990, or something that Jonah Hill directed. You probably
Mid
know the name of
90s.
it. Oh, the mid 90s. There we go. And it kind of reminded me of that aesthetic. So, yeah, pretty thoughtful, thought provoking movie.
How about you, Jim?
Yeah, just to reiterate for a third time, first viewing of this film. Uh, I was looking through Jonathan Demme's filmography today, and the only movie I've seen of his, surprisingly, is Stop Making Sense, the Talking Heads concert film, which is excellent. Yeah, really nice. I officially added Philadelphia to my watch list. Um, Denzel and Tom Hanks, and I can't believe I've never seen this movie, and it's called Philadelphia. Anyway, um, this movie became very quickly turned into something that was a lot bigger than what I thought was just going to be a very personal, um, like a family album. The the screenshot I watched. Did everybody watch this on YouTube? The screenshot is like a black and white photo of cousin Bobby. Um, but the movie got into some really heavy, very timely themes very quickly. Um, so just to run through my notes, and I don't, we can come back to any of these at any time. Isaiah Rowley, didn't know who that was. I feel like that name should have rung a bell in my head, but I didn't know who Isaiah Rowley was. Um, I noticed editing wise that peace and love and respect were they kept hammering those words all the way through the movie, I think. um I was kind of fascinated with the youth Marine cadets, and I'm a little confused as to what what that actually is, and how the leadership goes and who's actually in charge.
Mhm.
But there was a sign at one of the protests where it said, Jesus served the people, comma, follow him. And very recently in the movie, they'd referred to the youth Marine cadets as leaders in the community, even though they were getting picked on at school, like for not being cool. They were, which is weird to me because like if they're following in the footsteps of the Black Panthers, that's the furthest thing from lame that I could think of. So all in all, I would say this movie is kind of a time capsule of 1990, 1992. And Joe, I thought it was interesting what you said about like the grading of the movie. I didn't know that it was filmed on VHS.
At least
But there
it,
was one. Go
yeah,
ahead.
at least it looked like that from the way it was shot on the from the YouTube video I was watching. It looked like it was VHS.
Totally could be. But there was one point in the movie where looking at just what everybody was wearing in the on camera, I was like, this could be 1975 or 1980
Right.
or 19, like I had no idea. I was completely adrift at certain points in the movie. So yeah, some of the themes are really, really relevant. Um, and they kind of made me feel guilty for not being more educated on the Panthers and kind of what's going on in Harlem now because I moved out of the area 3 years ago now, so I'm not even really sure how safe Harlem is at this point, and what the situation is there. But I'll stop there. Shane, what did you think of the film?
Well, first off, I think it depends on who you ask how any major city is right now. Because if you ask specific people, you're going to get murdered every step that you take in any city because they're lawless hellscapes. But I think that really hits on just how relevant this film is, to be perfectly honest. Because this film came out in 1992, so this is 23 years old. And 33 years old. Duh. Um, I'm working on half my brain cells right now, so you all can enjoy that. But this film is over 30 years old. And really, like you said, Jim, is a time capsule of just the work of this man, but it also feels so timely because this is still going on 33 years later. It's actually really refreshing to see a Christian minister stepping up and, caring about underrepresented people and people who are facing adversity. Because, you don't hear that from every Christian community in 2025, to be honest. And I think this is such an interesting thing because, like, I guess my background with Jonathan Demme, I've obviously seen Silence of the Lambs plenty of times. I've seen Philadelphia. Actually, a pretty big fan of Rachel getting married with Anne Hathaway. And also Stop Making Sense is one of the greatest concert films ever created. So highly would recommend that. But yeah, this film is, and to your point, Joe, this feels very much like a home video. This feels like somebody loaded up their video camera, took it out from its spot that you take it out every holiday, and went on this journey of following his cousin around, Robert Castle, who, as it turns out, has been in multiple Jonathan Demme films. So apparently he's popped up in roles in some of his cousin's work. But this man is inspiring. And you know, this is the kind of figure that in today's world would get two very different adverse reactions from different groups of people, whether it's, wow, this person is thoughtful and caring and wants to really help his community too. This is just woke garbage destroying the Christian church and blah 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 blah. So, and watching him build this connection, being interviewed, this film for the most part's not really about like their family. It does have some of those moments where we get to like explore their family dynamics and their upbringing and stuff like that. But I feel like where this film is most meaningful is seeing how he's engaging with different members of his community, like that young cadet crew, which I'm like, how did they get to this rank? They look like they're 15. That kind of dynamic. But there's youth uh groups like that and have been for decades. But I found this film very impactful and something that obviously is very personal to Jonathan Demme, that he would take the time to make this film about a family member of his who he feels like is really making a difference in the world. And it's inspiring. And I appreciated Robert Castle as a subject, watching the documentary and listening to him speak and connect with his community. But at the end of the day, this is a really effective, well put together documentary. That's one thing, is Jonathan Demme might not have the most wide range of the amount of films that he made over the course of his career. He has a lot of credits because he did a lot of music videos too and stuff like that. And unfortunately passed away in 2017 at the age of 73. But also, it's really weird when I was looking at his filmography that one of his last films was Ricky and the Flash. That film with that's Meryl Streep in it, right? Where she's like an aging former rock star and wants to put the band back together and stuff like that. Yes, from the director of Silence of the Lambs. But this documentary, I think, was a very interesting subject. And, sometimes just throwing in a 70-minute film is a nice experience where it's not like we're watching this for 3 hours.
That's in a sense that the movie's fascinating in a sense that it's not really a family. It's like what you were saying, Jim. This isn't really a family album, right? It's shot like one, but it's really the focus is on the community. It's the focus on who the man was, which I find to be really endearing because one of the things that a lot of filmmakers appreciate about Jonathan Demme is that he's also an advocate when it comes to a lot of political, socio elements going on in the world today. And I feel like in some ways I mean, I don't know if it was made clear, but it's like he it doesn't sound like they were really close at one point. They like revisited each other, but it was just kind of something that I guess is just something that happened in their family to be, advocates. So I think that's kind of cool in a sense that they do it in their own way without necessarily being together all the time. Like I know you mentioned he was in his movies, but they still have separate lives. So in some ways, there's something pretty fascinating about that.
Well, it was interesting. It looks like all the films he showed up in were post this.
Mm,
So maybe like this film was that building that relationship back up for the two
right.
of them.
Good point.
Did you say Jonathan Demme passed away in 2017?
Yeah.
He looks great in this movie.
I guess
Like
he was
really
he
good in
was
this.
40
Oh wow.
when this movie was made. So
I was thinking like a decade younger. Yeah. But speaking to Joe's point, I saw that he did a movie about a movie, which was The Killing Fields. His movie was Swimming to Cambodia, which was, I guess, about the making of The Killing Fields, which is now also on my list. Cambodia was a wild trip. I recommend Cambodia to anybody. It's the poorest place I've ever been, but like the fact that like I've also been to Germany. I've been to Sachsenhausen, the concentration camp in Germany. And I've been to Cambodia now too. And that was like 30 years more recent. And it was just wild to think about, like the way history works. And I guess it jumped out at me that he used the word genocide. Robert did. Cousin Bobby did. He used the word genocide in this movie. Um, when he was, I guess, when you spend a career as a minister, you get comfortable talking in front of people, you know. But obviously, um, he knew what he wanted to say, and he was very comfortable saying it. Um, like the camera didn't rattle him the way it did those kids when the camera was put in the face of those youth Marine cadets. They were a bunch of them were like stuttering and like having second thoughts about what they were going to say. Very self-assured, very confident about what he was saying. And yeah, I think Shane, you said something to this point earlier, but like I don't know if refreshing is the right word, but it was good to hear a man in um it's not a cassock. In
Collar.
I don't know, collar, yeah, collared gentleman say matter of factly, yes, we live in a racist society. And that's still something that's controversial to say in 2025, you know?
The funny thing about that, though, it's funny you say that because people will say it's racist, but in some ways, never to really progress something. It's to say it because it's the right thing to say, not necessarily that to believe it or have a conviction to it. Where I feel like this is a time before the internet where you don't have echo chambers to really do that, And
Yeah.
there's something to be said about that when it comes to advocacy nowadays, where it's like keyboard warrior versus someone that goes to a soup kitchen or is, doing, going to protests.
Or
Um,
getting arrested.
or
Yeah.
getting arrested.
Mhm.
Exactly. Exactly. And he's talked about plenty of times where he's like, I've got to be bailed out of jail because I'm doing what I believe in. But I also think it's interesting too because I think when it comes to faith, there it goes one of two ways. You do have the type of faith where it becomes kind of what's the word I'm looking for? Um, exploitative of people's fears or their emotions. But in this way, this is where faith is used for community and used in a way to speak to people who don't have a voice. It's kind of like with the poster that says Jesus, the poster you mentioned in that protest, is that it is a common goal, a common idea that's bringing people together and not separating people. So being a minister and being able to advocate for that, I think is it really speaks volumes to that, and I think also shows the power and the good of being religious.
Well, and I think it's important too that so much of his messaging is about community.
Mm-hmm.
And he's in Harlem.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you basically have two options. It could be like, you know, do the right thing where you have the teeny tiny group of Italian Americans who very adversely don't approve of the rest of their community, or you can be somebody like cousin Bobby who embraces that he's part of a community made up of people that are very different than him.
Yeah.
And like, if you're going to be a priest in Harlem, it's not like you're going to be preaching to a whole group of white people. That's just not going to happen. Like, I know the church I grew up in and went to in Haddonfield, New Jersey, was just filled with nothing but white people, a lot of Italians for sure, but a lot of white people. And this kind of experience of him taking his stage, his pulpit, and speaking to the adverse experiences of the people in his community, despite the fact that he didn't experience those kinds of things. I do find it interesting that he is originally from Jersey City, New Jersey. And like, any time that they're with their family, it's very much not like, hey, we're in Harlem. No, it's like out in the middle of nowhere. Um, and I think that makes it even more interesting, that dichotomy between the like more home video elements of talking about their family versus him and his element in his work. And I had a very interesting experience because, like, I'm a confirmed Roman Catholic. I grew up a Roman Catholic. went to Christ the King Parish in Haddonfield, New Jersey. And I went to what I would describe as a mega church. Um on my trip to North Carolina, my nephews were singing that Sunday, and my sister-in-law and brother asked me if we would go. I was able to dress up as Vacation Shane and not feel out of place, which was the weirdest shit to me. It was like, you're not dressing up for church? Um, all the men were in dad heat, like flannels and jeans and stuff like that. I'm like, I immediately walked in and turned to Jess and was like, I feel too ethnic for here. I was one of the only people with almost black hair. I'm like, take me back to
it's
New Jersey.
it's different down there. People ask like where like which congregation are you a part of? Where do you go to church? In casual conversation.
Like,
Um
that's my business.
yeah, exactly. But it's interesting. I mean, I'm out here in Utah, um, and like the Mormon influence is everywhere, you know? Um, there are Samoans around, but like otherwise it's not a very diverse place. That's what I thought of when you said like when they go to the family reunion, they're in like some beautiful middle of nowhere Vermont country
Yeah.
house or something. That I kind of feel like I've like removed myself from Camden and um Jersey City, you know, and I'm like out here in the mountains where everything's beautiful, but like there really aren't any brown people around. So it like, especially talking about Catholicism, also a confirmed Catholic, by the way, fallen away, I think is what they would call me. Um, there, I kind of feel there's some guilt there, you know, because like I kind of sometimes feel like what can I do, or it's not my fight, or like you know maybe it's rationalizing or excuses, but like seeing this white man step up to this role in Harlem is it makes me think. I don't know if it makes you guys think.
It does, because I think about how I do. I don't want to go on a soapbox. I really don't want to treat this as like a soapbox, but I believe in white privilege. I believe there is, if you have power, right, or you have the ability to speak for somebody that doesn't have a voice. Like I've witnessed some outright racism that's happened in front of me, and I've had to like, be in that situation of like, I might want to say something, because it's just like, am I gonna like be a part of the system, be a bystander? Like, I was I don't remember the specifics of it, but like I was out and I was told to go wait. I think it was a round of golf, and I was told to play ahead of somebody. And someone that was waiting there for 30 minutes that was black was not told to play golf, or like was still waiting. That I had to go back to the guy, and I was like, she's been out here for a really long time. Why don't you let her play with me? And like he gave me an eye roll, and I'm just like, that's fucked up. I know I don't want this to be deactivated. I hope this is far enough in the video where it's not going to get you demonetized. But I mean, I couldn't help it. Like that's just messed up. And
Hmm.
sometimes you kind of have a right to say something. Especially if it's just blatant.
Well, that was a dick move for sure.
Yeah,
And like the point that I brought up, like I went to this different church and all of it, like I had a lot of thoughts about this. What did my sister-in-law? It wasn't a mass. My mom was corrected. It was not a mass. I'm like, okay. This meeting that I went to, and there is very much that sense of like honestly, the first 25 minutes of this meeting was like concert time,
Mhm.
Christian rockers. But like so much of it was about community and how important it is about community. And like, I'm not gonna lie, like I could see the sense of community that all these people were having with each other and coming together, and like I can understand. And I have a lot of problems with organized religion at this point. because there should be a lot like I'm gonna take aim at Catholics real right now because I am one. There should be a lot more Catholic guilt about how other people are treated, but it's not yours. So not worrying about them like that doesn't sound very Christian of you. And that's honestly the perspective that a lot of people have today. I find this film very interesting because this was made in 1992 by a white filmmaker, highlighting a white priest in Harlem. And like, if you were going to make a documentary about a minister in Harlem in 2025, my guess would probably be not the white one. But it's interesting because Jonathan Demme had that connection and used that connection to be able to highlight the work that Robert Castle is doing. And it's so interesting. Like, I would have loved to hear the discourse around this film coming out in 1992. Because, this was what the end of GHW and into the Bill Clinton era of America. Like, what would this get reaction in Trump America?
Yeah.
I
I
feel like
did
it would either
Rodney
be.
Rodney King did not come up at all, did he? Did this film come out? That was
I would
92, right?
well, I would assume this probably was filmed before 92
Right.
and then came out in 92. But like I would I could see two potential reactions to this film. One being, you know, hey, this is a bunch of woke garbage. Because, it would get that kind of reaction. And I could also potentially see the reaction of like, why are we um holding up this white savory individual in a community of people of color? And it's a very interesting kind of time capsule that, like 30 years ago, this probably would have been accepted as, wow, this is very uplifting. I'm glad that I got to see this. But like a film like this would get a lot more critical response today from both sides. And, you know, I'm of the mindset that one, you do need to uplift voices of people that don't have their own voices. That's important. But also to be pragmatic, because I generally am a pragmatic person and will look at the world we live in before I think about the world that I wish we lived in. You kind of have to start with those that are alike, making a difference, who make any kind of influence on the people that are like them. Because, like, who are a lot of white people going to be more likely to listen to? A white person or a black person or a Hispanic person? It's just like, it's the white one. And it's an interesting thing because I do think that obviously cousin Bobby here made a huge impact. He did make it. He passed away, it looked like in 2012. At the age of 83. So he lived a nice long life. He made an impact. And I think it's important to highlight those kinds of things. It just so happens that his cousin was a filmmaker and was able to get his story out there. And I think that's important. And to be honest, and to be frank, so how a lot of stories do get out there. Not everybody has the money or the resources to make a documentary about their work. You need somebody to have the resources, make the decision to tell that story. And it just so happened that, your cousin was because Jonathan Demme won Best Director for Silence of the Lambs, right?
Yeah.
So like this is him coming off of winning an Oscar. Like this is a high profile film, but it's like point in Demi's career, but also a very personal kind of film. So it's very interesting, just like the context of this film being made. But at the end of the day, I still think it's a really important film to see. It's important to see that people put their money where their mouth is and do stuff.
I agree. And you know what? The fact that he lived to 82, right? being able to live to 82, doing what it is that you feel passionate about, having had adversity in your life, but doing what you believed is right is such a good feeling. You know, that that to me really speaks volumes. And it's also the reason why, and this is going to sound really schmaltzy, but why I love going to the movies is that, black, white, Asian, we all go through those doors and we're all getting a story and we're all being painted a visual of what's going on and what an artist is showing, either showing originally or just showing back to you on what's going on in the world. And that is I guess that schmaltzy, the magic of movies.
Well, and to your point, Joe, we all have our different experience watching that film as well. It was very interesting. Shamelessly plugged my favorite podcast, The Cinephiles. It was very interesting because it was one of the most con- contentious episodes of that podcast, and they've been doing it for 9 years. Was for Crimson Tide.
Which one?
Crimson Tide, the Tony Scott submarine movie with Gene
Oh yeah.
Hackman and Denzel Washington. It was very
Yeah.
contentious because the two hosts of the Cinephiles, one is a Jewish man and one is a Latino man, and how different they perceived motivations of characters.
Wow.
Was there racism at the root of some of these decisions that were happening between Gene Hackman and Denzel Washington's characters, and they had very differing perspectives. They watched the same movie, and that's
Hmm.
an interesting thing because what film is able to do is like, you know, I just watched a 1929 film for one of my other podcasts about Soviet Russia. My perspective 96 years later is going to be very different, and being an American is going to be very different than what Soviet citizens would have seen watching a man with a movie camera in 1929. And, the three of us sit here watching this documentary 33 years later and seeing a different world perspective on probably was what is a very inspiring story, but there's other layers and baggage to it contextually at this point. But I do think that, you know, not everybody's interested in sitting and watching documentaries unless it's true crime documentaries, because it seems like everybody who's a millennial loves their damn true crime documentaries. But like this is a 70-minute film that is really worth your time. Go back and experience and see that even 30 plus years ago, there's people pointing out, well, it's also kind of sad that 33 years ago somebody was so blatantly pointing out all the things going wrong just for us to, continue to do a lot of those things. But it's inspiring seeing somebody step up and do something. And I think it's also interesting that it took people going to see this in a theater to be able to hear this story versus like we live in a world of social media. We're watching active protests on camera, like watching them people engaging with authority figures, whether it's ICE or the police and stuff like that, live on social media. It's a wild thing how life has changed in the past 30 years. And it's interesting being able to go and watch this film and see how Jonathan Demme captured this moment and the impact of this man, his cousin, and all the work that he did. Jim, did you have anything you wanted to add?
I've got so many thoughts. Where to start? Okay. You asked a minute ago about like how the film would be received now as opposed to in 1992. Where in 92 it's probably going to be generally received as progressive
Hmm.
and maybe brave filmmaking, whereas today it would be like, why are you focusing on the white savior figure of the whole thing. But I'm I'm thinking of, well, question one, is that progress as a society for us to have that shift in perspective? I don't answer that. It's just a, I'm just going to throw it out there. And recently, as Catholics, we have a new pope recently. I met a cardinal from Africa when I was, I don't know, a teenager. My family used to go to like a Catholic summer camp out in the middle of nowhere. And this man visited, and he was fully eligible to become pope through the last two. He's too old at this point, really, to be considered viable. But the two previous elections for pope, we could have had a black man as pope, and didn't happen. And I think to a lot of people, they wouldn't even consider that. They would brush that thought aside, you know? So here we have another white man as pope. I hope he's seen this movie. I would hope that he uses his position in a similar way that this man does. Last thought for now, I think, is just the audience. It's not made for people in Harlem. This movie was made for people like me to watch, people like us to watch, you know? I think that's all I have for now. The dog's trying to pull himself inside. Give me 1 second.
Well, and to that point, because like the people in Harlem are living this or lived this, they don't need a documentary to tell them what their experience is like. But to be frank, a lot of people do need documentaries to show them what's really going on in the world. And like back in the day, news used to be something that was valued and that you could turn on, Walter Cronkite and just be like, I'm going to get to know what's happening in the world. And now it's like, oh, what shit's everybody shoveling now? On whatever network that you're watching or whatever social media or podcast or YouTube channel that you watch, it just inundated with so many things. But being able to watch a film like this and having something highlighted, I'm a huge fan of documentaries because I learn so much. And like, I'm not the most adventurous person. I don't travel. I don't go out adventuring so often, but I've learned so much about other people's perspectives and experiences and cultures through film. And documentaries are an amazing way for somebody to capture people, a place, an event, and for other people to be able to learn about it. And you could do that with narrative film as well. You just, have to take it with a grain of salt that, William Wallace was dead by the time that, like, a princess from France who apparently he slept with in Braveheart was actually like 5 years old when he died and they never met. So like, you just got to take it with a grain of salt that, most of these films are not 100% historically accurate. And the challenging thing is you can lie a lot with a documentary too. I'm looking at you, Michael Moore, who does in fact lie a lot with his editing and his documentaries. But the thing is, you can be able to take a snapshot of something. And, I had never heard of Robert Castle. Like, why would I know much about some minister from Harlem? I barely know anything about any priests outside of my own experiences of going to church. Or in, the Pope, because, it's the Pope. We got our new Chicago, who's a White Sox fan, and it's just like, good luck to you. Um, I'm looking forward to that first Major League Baseball game in Rome. Going to be Yankees and Dodgers. I can 100% guarantee you that.
I'll see him.
you better pick some teams with a bunch of Italian Americans on it. It'll be more meaningful that way. So yes, probably the Yankees.
If they don't
Um,
trade Anthony Volpe, there
Anthony Volpe needs to go to Rome and play some baseball.
you go.
But like, I appreciated this documentary, and I think one of the things that I don't know how much I reinforce here is like I can appreciate when a filmmaker makes a very personal film. Like I just watched that new documentary, My Mom Jane, that Mariska Hargitay made about her mom, Jane Mansfield. And like obviously I know who Mariska Hargitay is from all the decades that my mom's been watching Law and Order SVU. But like this was a very, very personal film about her mom died when she was 3 and her trying to understand who her mom really was outside of the high pitched, like, starlet who was supposed to be like the next Marilyn Monroe and stuff like that. But like, I can appreciate a film taking a very personal approach. And that's a hard line to walk because most times, like, I would expect like a documentary should be very objective. Because the thing is, like, you're trying to present something of meaning, and we all have our biases, and if you make it very personal, but I think Jonathan Demme did a great job here of capturing, like, yes, this is my family member, but like this is what he was able to do and the things that he did. But I do like I felt that home video approach to this because it really is a family member really capturing like I I wish I had a family member that I felt so inspired about what they were doing to change the world that I would make a film about them. Nothing against my dad who's a carpenter, my brother who works in
A
social media,
documentary about Ethan, directed by the Safdie brothers.
directed by Shane Kanto.
There you go.
Um it'll be an interesting one. And like I would like to think someday that I made such an impact in the world that I had a family member who wanted to make a film about me. Like, that would be nice. 'Cause that meant that I did something that made a difference. And like I feel like I make a difference every day working in higher education. I get our youth at the end of the line and hopefully give them enough skills to leave school permanently and go out into the real world. I
I
guess if we haven't, oh, go ahead, Joe.
I was gonna say, it's a very fascinating piece because like I'm reminded of another documentary that came out where De Niro made a documentary about his father, and that his father was actually I think bisexual. I don't know if he was he eventually came out of the closet, but that he was a extremely talented painter that not only faced challenges of being from an Italian American family and work and relying on his artwork to support a family, but also struggling with his with his sexual orientation. It's interesting for De Niro to paint a picture about that, literally, you know, no pun intended.
Make an essential list of documentaries that are personal experiences and connections for filmmakers would be interesting.
I think even not so much a documentary, but the book Mouse by Art Spiegelman is a good
Mhm.
example of that too, but also in a way where instead of a person that he looks up to, he kind of despises. And that's another fascinating aspect where it's like he's really making this because he's thinking about it going in one way and then making it and realizing that, like in journalism, you're not going to like what you find because this is what you're seeing,
My
you know.
dad pisses me off all the time, but my dad went through some stuff.
Yeah.
And I actually read Mouse for the first time this year.
Ooh. What do you
And I
think?
actually lent it to a friend of the show, Haileigh, who'll
Good.
be reading it too. Because, you know, I approve of, stories where Nazis are bad guys still. In 2025. And
I want to do a separate podcast with you on that book. That's one of my favorites.
we could. We'll
Love to have
figure
a
it
great
out.
conversation about it.
But I guess, does anybody have anything else they wanted to add? I feel like it's interesting because this was our first documentary, so it's been a first time for us to talk about just documentaries in general and stuff like that, but also about the story that Jonathan Demme is able to capture here. But any final thoughts that we want to throw out before we wrap this show up?
Yeah, I'll just share the next. I know I've already mentioned two movies that I put on my watch list, but
Mhm.
in the queue, there's a Black Panthers documentary on Netflix, which I haven't seen. Shane, you might have seen it, called Vanguard of the Revolution. That's what I'm going to be watching in very,
Nice.
very shortly. um, and then it's a little bit off topic, but I heard that voice. They do it twice. He uses it twice, actually. Get your head off the pillow and put a book in it is the line from the song at the beginning and the end of the documentary. And I was like, I know that voice. It's KRS-One. So there's also a little film about that community in New York, called A Complete History of the Native Tongues. And that's free on YouTube, about like the group, A Tribe Called Quest, and Junk Brothers, and that whole community of Black artists in Brooklyn, Queens. I don't know if any of them came from Harlem itself, but they made kind of it's a gentleman's agreement is the word that's in my head, but like they made kind of a pact to make positive Afrocentric um, music, sampling funk and hip hop. And I mean, KRS-One goes a little bit into what we call gangster rap, I guess. But yeah, the that's the only thing that I wanted to say, I think, before we wrap up here.
I can appreciate that because that's also a challenge too. Because if you think about so many films about the Black community, like post, like pre 2000, so many of them are about like Black trauma, like The Color Purple, or Roots, you know,
Or Biggie, and death. But this like true crime thing that has come up a couple of times. People
yeah,
are fascinated by the macabre.
we appreciate some Black joy and that experience of like highlighting that, like, you know, there's some things to appreciate in life and like stories like that to highlight. So I could appreciate that. How about you, Joe? Anything else you want to add before we wrap up?
I think I got most of my points out there. Great film. It's free on YouTube. I love watching free stuff and stuff that makes me think.
Well, I also got a lot of thoughts and mucus out during this episode. So I hope you all appreciated the latest episode of the Movie Club here on the Development Hell podcast. We do not know our next film, but we will be having another episode coming out next month, first Thursday of the month, every month. And, it'll at least be 10 years old. That's basically the only thing that we're running with right now. But from Joe, from Jim, and from Shane, thank you all for tuning in and always supporting the Development Hell podcast.